He had done everything they asked. 7 days, almost no sleep, food that came in silver foil wrappers torn open with fingers that barely cooperated. Energy drinks consumed cold because he kept forgetting to check the temperature. He had stayed at that screen through headaches gathering behind his eyes, like pressure building inside something sealed, through exhaustion so deep the walls of the PC cafe looked slightly curved, through stretches of time when his own reflection in the monitor startled him because he had forgotten what his own face looked like. He had gotten the sword. Not just any sword. The Fire King's blade was the kind of item that existed in the game the way legends exist in old books. Everyone knew what it was. Almost no one ever touched one. The wiki listed the drop rate at 0.03% from the final boss of a 40-player raid that most servers had not completed, even with full organized groups. There was a note, in small font, at the bottom of the page. It said, "Solo completion of the required content was considered effectively impossible." Dowin had obtained the blade alone in 7 days. He placed it on the trade screen in front of Chul Wu. He watched the notification flash green. And somewhere in the middle of watching it, his body finished the quiet argument it had been having with him for the last 48 hours, and simply stopped cooperating. He did not fall dramatically. He slumped, like something let go of. The chair held him for a moment, then did not. The screen stayed glowing. The energy drink he had set beside the keyboard was still fizzing faintly. That was how Dowin's first life ended. Not in a fight, not in something meaningful. In a PC cafe on a Thursday, with someone else's mission complete and his own body spent. The harsh truth of his world had always been the same. Strength made the rules. He had none. So the rules existed for other people, and he carried out the parts no one else wanted to do. It had taken 16 years to die from that arrangement. What came after was something different entirely. To understand it, you have to go back further than the PC cafe. Back to a smaller version of Dowin at a school desk, with his third controller of the year, in a house where his father's coat still hung on the hook by the door, long after there was no longer anyone to wear it. His father had died 4 years earlier. The official document said accident. It described a vehicle and a road, and a sequence of events that the word accidental covered, without fully explaining. Dowin had been 12. He read the document twice, placed it back in the folder where he found it, and did not look at it again. He gamed instead. People who knew him from the outside assumed the gaming was avoidance, or the kind of purposeless time-filling that keeps a person from facing something real. They were not entirely wrong, but they missed the thing that made Dowin different from every other kid who disappeared into a screen. He was extraordinarily good. Not competitive circuit good, not famous for it good, the kind of good that has no external audience because it happens at the level of completion. Clearing everything, finding every solution, never abandoning a game once started regardless of how punishing it became. He had cleared fighting games to their deepest challenge tiers, every character, every hidden route. He had beaten survival titles in configurations the developers had not balanced for. He approached each game like a problem to be taken apart and solved, keeping at it with the patience of someone who had learned early that persistence was the one thing no one could take from him. Nobody at school saw this as anything useful. From the outside, it looked like exactly what it was, a skinny kid spending too many hours at a screen. Chul Wu specifically saw a tool. Chul Wu ran the third-floor hallway with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to having everything arranged around his preferences. He was large and carried the specific quality that some physically dominant people carry, a gravitational effect that made people near him adjust their paths and choose quieter words. He had noticed Dowin during a class trip when the free period landed near a computer lab. Without any apparent effort, Dowin had cleared a dungeon in 12 minutes that a group of 4 others had been attempting for most of the hour. Chul Wu said nothing that day. 3 days later, he walked up to Dowin's desk, set his phone face up with a game screenshot visible, and made himself clear in a few words. Dowin had already calculated the cost of saying no. He said yes. That was the beginning of the arrangement. Rare items, high-level runs, account leveling, currency grinding. It rotated depending on what Chul Wu's group needed. Dowin delivered. The payment was the absence of something worse, which is a currency that people who have never been frightened of someone consistently undervalue. He had been working the arrangement for most of the school year when the Fire King's sword appeared. Chul Wu showed him the screenshot, and Dowin felt something specific and quiet. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of being assigned a task whose difficulty you understand immediately, while the person giving it does not. He said he would see what he could do. He started that same evening. He set up the account, mapped the content, and began building an approach. His workspace was the corner table in the PC cafe near the school, used long enough that the staff left the same chair for him and kept a notepad by the register for his snack orders because he sometimes forgot to speak between runs. Day 1 was reconnaissance. Days 2 and 3 were failed attempts from which he extracted data. He kept a separate notepad beside the keyboard with enemy patterns written in shorthand, notes the official guides either missed or described incorrectly. He ate when alarms reminded him. He slept in 2 or 3 hour windows and broke most of those. On day 3, something shifted. A player he recognized from leaderboards appeared in the raid lobby with a brief message. The player had noticed someone attempting the content solo. He called it a fool's errand. He also said he had spare time that evening. Dowin responded carefully. He described exactly what he needed: a specific support role, a precise positional commitment in the second phase, no interference with his own approach elsewhere. He offered 2 account-bound items from his personal inventory as payment, items that cost him nothing tactically but had considerable trade value. The older player agreed. With that one gap in the fight geometry closed, the raid became solvable. 11 more attempts followed. On the 6th day, the blade dropped. Dowin stared at it. He confirmed the pickup, took a screenshot. His hands were shaking, and his mouth tasted like 3 types of energy drink layered over each other. He submitted the sword. Chul Wu confirmed receipt, then mentioned in passing, with the tone of someone noting a minor administrative detail, that he had found a different player for the leveling work this month. Dowin's schedule was free. Dowin walked back to the corner table. He sat down. His vision was wrong, not blurry exactly. More like the refresh rate on the world had dropped a few frames. He pressed his back against the chair and breathed with some deliberateness. His chest tightened. His hands, which had been shaking for 2 days, went still. Not because they steadied. Because something more fundamental stopped first. The screen in front of him went from sharp to white to nothing. A tone arrived, not a sound. Something that delivered information directly, the way pain delivers information. Without requiring translation, it said, "Analysis beginning. Please wait." He had no voice to answer with. He waited. What came next, in the dark, was a full accounting of everything he had done with his time. The system moved through it without hurry. Game titles, completion rates, challenge tiers, solo clears, strategies developed and used, skills mastered to the level of reflex. It did not react to the list. It compiled, the way a machine processes a long document, without forming opinions about the contents. At the end, it reached a conclusion. On a standard scale, Dowin's baseline was ordinary. Physical ability, social standing, combat experience, all of it landed in unremarkable ranges. But the system flagged something it treated with seriousness. A completed game was not nothing. The hours compressed into cleared content were not wasted time. Every finished playthrough was a technical template containing real skills, real movement logic, real combat reasoning. And Dowin had cleared more of them, more thoroughly, than almost anyone the system had apparently evaluated. Other people looked at him and saw a gaming nerd with nothing to show for it. The system looked at the same record and saw a library. A search event was offered. He was not clearly asked. Whatever remained of him chose yes anyway. The jolt came, sudden, brief, and then he was somewhere. He was in his classroom. Morning light through the windows on the left side, angled slightly, catching the dust drifting above the desks. The smell was chalk and the specific cleaning product the school used on the floors, something that hinted vaguely at citrus without committing to it. Someone behind him was drawing in the margins of a textbook with short, quiet strokes. 2 girls near the door passed a folded note between them without being noticed. Dowin did not move. A notification window hovered at the edge of his vision, faint, like software running behind the main screen. He raised his right hand and looked at his palm. No mark. The small cut he would receive in 3 months from the edge of a metal chair had not happened yet. He checked the date on the whiteboard. The teacher had his back to the room, writing something. 3 months earlier, before the sword, before the 7 days, before the cafe. He put his hand down. He breathed. The notification window continued loading. He let it load. He sat with what he knew. He was alive. He was in the past, and his chest no longer hurt. He waited for the system to finish. He did not wait long. Chul Wu came at lunch, the way he always had, moving through the third-floor corridor, with the same easy authority. Same two people flanking him. Same short request. The same casual expectation that it would be received the same way. Dowin looked at him, not the way he had looked the first time, with the quick eyes of someone absorbing an instruction they already know they will follow. He looked at him with the attention of someone who has already watched this particular story reach its ending. The system window flickered. A progress bar he had not noticed before reached completion. A soft chime sounded that no one else seemed to register. Text appeared across his vision. Evaluation complete. Class assigned. Player. Below that, a skill name with its source game listed beside it. He did not have time to read the full description. Chul Wu, reading his expression as something unexpected from this particular person, reached out and shoved him into the wall. Dowin's shoulder met the concrete. He felt the impact fully, and his body, instead of folding into the old familiar stillness, did something different. His feet planted. His right fist came forward and connected with the side of Chul Wu's jaw. A short distance. A clean angle. The specific motion from a fighting game he had completed in every mode at every difficulty. A game played until its patterns existed behind his eyes before he ever thought about them. Chul Wu stepped back. His companions went completely still. A silence held in that corridor. The kind that follows something that was not supposed to happen to someone like Dowin. His knuckles carried a warmth. Numbers appeared at the edge of his vision. Experience awarded. Level advance. The bully recovered. He came forward faster, no longer casual. Dowin moved without deliberating, because the skill bypassed the hesitation that usually lived in the gap between intention and action. A low sweep at ankle height. Chul Wu went down onto the corridor floor with the abruptness of someone who had never in his life expected to be there. The companion by the exit took one step forward and stopped. More notifications appeared. More numbers advanced. The system window expanded. New panels opening. A column of skills filling the screen. Each one sourced from a game he had cleared. Each one locked behind a specific key type. Most of the list was sealed. Chul Wu stood. He was breathing audibly. He wanted to know what Dowin thought he was doing. Dowin answered simply. He told him the arrangement was finished. A long pause. Then Chul Wu left, both companions following, one of them glancing backward twice before the corridor turned. Dowin let the wall take some of his weight. His heartbeat was strong and present, not fearful, the physiological response that comes after action rather than before it. He looked at the skills panel fully. Dozens of locked entries. The library the system had identified in his gaming history was now displayed as real abilities, each waiting for a real key to open it. At the top of the inventory section, a single gold key pulsed with slow, steady light. He understood the structure without needing it explained. Progress gated behind requirements. Access earned through effort. A system that would assign missions, reward completion, and almost certainly penalize failure. He had navigated this architecture thousands of times before. He knew what it asked of people who wanted to advance. Except the wall behind him was real. Chul Wu hitting the floor had been real. The 7 days and the cafe chair, and the moment his body stopped, all of it had been real. He looked down the empty corridor. A month from now, a dangerous invitation would come from a direction he was not yet watching. The gangs beyond the school were larger than Chul Wu, and would not be impressed by what had happened here today. A council of organized bullies he did not yet know existed would eventually need to know his name. The missions ahead would ask more from him than this first one had. None of it was going to be simple. But Dowin had spent years clearing content that was not designed to be clearable. He had broken 40-player raids into solo solvable problems. He had tracked enemy patterns in a notepad while his hands shook from lack of sleep. He had stayed at a screen for 7 days because someone required it. He was done doing that for someone else's benefit. He started walking toward the stairs, the system window still open at the edge of his vision, the gold key still pulsing in its slot. Questions moved through his mind without answers yet. Who built the system? What it ultimately wanted from him? Why it had selected someone the rest of the world considered a waste of time? He had learned one thing from years of impossible content. You do not understand a system by standing still and studying it from the outside. You go in. You play. He descended the stairs and started planning. The system did not give him long to settle. 2 days after the corridor fight, a message appeared in his system window that he had not requested and could not close. It described a location, a karaoke venue 4 blocks from school. It named a time, that evening. Below the description, a small penalty warning blinked in red. He had not yet failed a mission. He did not know what the penalty felt like. He did not particularly want to find out. The karaoke venue was not the kind of place Dowin would have chosen. Loud, cramped, light, coming from several competing directions at once, a bass frequency running through the floor that he felt in his back teeth. He arrived at the designated room and found it already occupied. Jamon was there. The name came to him through context. Someone addressed the boy directly twice before Dowin sorted out who was who. Jamon was a year older, built with the proportions that make people in hallways step aside without being asked, surrounded by a group that clearly organized itself around his preferences. Several girls sat near him. 2 other boys held positions close to the door. Dowin took a seat near the back and read the situation carefully. He noticed the other boy almost immediately. He was sitting apart from the main group, in the corner beside the screen, not quite part of the gathering, and clearly not permitted to leave. Someone had given him tasks, fetching drinks, adjusting the music controls, doing the small labor that groups sometimes assign to the person with least standing. He was doing it with the particular quietness of someone who has learned that making noise only makes things worse. Dowin recognized that posture. He had worn it himself for a long time. The system updated. New mission text appeared. It told him to strike Jamin with one of the microphone stands before the next song ended. He read the instruction twice. The penalty warning was still blinking. He assessed the room. Jamon was laughing at something, positioned sideways on the bench with one arm thrown over the back. The metal stand nearest to Dowin had a round weighted base. The distance between them was roughly 4 meters. The current song had approximately 90 seconds remaining. He looked at the boy in the corner, still moving between tasks with his eyes down. Then he stood up. He crossed the room without announcing himself as a threat, moving toward the front as though heading for the controls. He picked up the stand as he passed the table beside it. Jamon looked up approximately 1 second before Dowin swung. The stand connected with a clatter that overrode the music briefly. Jamon went sideways. The room went from noise to a sudden collective silence. Then it went to chaos. The mission closed. Experience arrived. A new one opened before the previous notification had finished fading. The new mission said, "Do not leave this room until you have defeated the largest opponent present." Dowin looked at the room. The largest opponent was near the door. He was approximately a head taller than anyone else in the space, and his expression had shifted over the last 3 seconds, from surprise to something considerably less pleasant. He rolled his neck once on each side. He started moving. Dowin checked his inventory. The copper key sitting below the gold one was still unused. He selected it. The system prompted him. Use to upgrade a basic stat. He chose mana. The number climbed. A skill entry that had been locked a moment before turned available. Falcon Descent. He did not have time to read the full description. The large opponent reached him and threw a punch that was wide but heavy. Dowin moved out of the angle it traveled by a narrow margin. He read the description line while moving. A downward strike, maximum force, activated from height. The room had a bench along the back wall. He moved toward it while keeping the large opponent tracking him, stepped up onto the surface, and judged the distance. The skill activated. He came down with both fists, driving into the large opponent's shoulders from above. The impact was considerably harder than anything he had yet produced, and it arrived from an angle the opponent had not been watching. The large boy went down onto his knees, then forward onto the floor. The room was very loud now. The other members of Jamon's group had sorted themselves from stunned into organized, and they were moving with purpose. Dowin stepped down off the bench and checked the mission status. Complete. A third notification appeared. Leave the premises before additional contacts arrive. He was already moving toward the door. He cleared the corridor before the group reorganized. He took the stairs at the far end of the building. Behind him, he heard voices, and then heavier footsteps, and then, from outside, the rising pitch of a police siren closing in. The footsteps behind him stopped. Voices dropped. He kept moving. He made it 4 blocks before his body collected the bill for the evening. The exhaustion that follows a fight lands differently than ordinary tiredness. It arrives all at once when the situation becomes safe enough to feel it. Dowin sat down on a low wall outside a convenience store and understood he was not going further for a while. He was still there, head back, watching the strip of sky between two buildings, when someone sat down beside him without announcing themselves first. He looked. A girl, around his age, with dark hair and the expression of someone who had been watching the situation from a nearby position and had formed their own conclusions. She glanced at him sideways, then away, as though verifying something. She told him her name, Seon. He did not know how to respond immediately. His system window was still processing the evening. Experience tallied, keys cataloged, a mission debrief running through fields he had not yet learned to read fully. He was tired in a deep way, and she had appeared without warning. She said she had been near the door of the karaoke venue. She said she had seen how the large person went down. He waited. She told him she knew a place he could sit for a while without being found. She said it without pressure, the way someone offers directions to a bus stop. He followed her. The place was a narrow room above a laundry that her family apparently had some arrangement with, accessible through a side stairwell that was easy to miss. It smelled like detergent and old wood and was large enough for two people sitting with their backs against opposite walls. Dowin sat. His system window ran quietly. His knuckles had a faint ache from the evening's work. Seon sat across from him and looked at him with a calm, direct attention he was not used to receiving from anyone. Most people either dismissed him or were calculating what he could be useful for. She seemed to be doing neither. She told him he fought strangely. He asked what she meant. She said the way he moved did not match the way he looked. She said it was like someone had assembled different pieces and expected no one to notice the joins. He said nothing to that. She told him she was not going to ask about it. Then she said she was going to ask him for one thing instead, and asked whether he would agree before she named it. He looked at her. She had helped him without being asked. She had not told anyone where he was. She sat across from him in a small room above a laundry and spoke to him like a person rather than an obstacle or an asset. He told her he would agree. She nodded. She said she would call on the agreement later, when she needed it, and that she trusted him to remember. She did not name what it was. She closed the subject and asked if he was hungry. When he said yes, she produced 2 wrapped rice triangles from the bag beside her and handed one across. They sat in the small room above the laundry, eating in silence, while the system window cataloged the night's events in the corner of his vision. He thought about the boy from the karaoke venue corner. He wondered whether the boy had gotten out during the confusion or was still there, still moving quietly between tasks. He thought about the copper key and what it had unlocked. In the days that followed, Dowin began learning the system properly. The key types were the center of it. Bronze and copper addressed raw physical statistics: strength, speed, reaction time, the basic architecture of what his body could do. Silver keys opened passive traits, abilities that ran in the background without being called on, reshaping how he operated at rest. Gold keys unlocked active skills, the techniques drawn from the library of games he had cleared. Missions supplied the keys. Completed objectives awarded experience and sometimes keys directly. Defeated opponents were registered in the system's notation with a faint marker that turned them into targets with measurable properties. It was strange to watch this happen, and stranger still to become accustomed to it. He found a bronze key the day after the karaoke venue, awarded for a minor mission completed on the way to school. He used it on his strength stat and noticed the difference during his afternoon run when the pavement seemed to offer less resistance than usual. He found a copper key 2 days later and put it toward his mana ceiling, extending the capacity for skills that cost more to sustain. The system was not simply providing power, it was rationing access to things he had already built up over years, releasing them in portions as he proved he could handle each level before moving to the next. Falcon Descent had been locked until he had enough mana to activate it cleanly. The skill below it on the list required something he had not yet located. The passive entries were waiting on silver keys he had not yet earned. It was, in structure, exactly like a game, which meant it was exactly the kind of system he knew better than anyone around him had any reason to suspect. He began tracking missions the way he had once tracked raid mechanics, in a notebook kept in his school bag, updated after each development, cross-referenced against his key inventory, and the locked skills list. The system did not offer a recommended progression path. It required him to find one, the way well-designed games require finding one. He found it. Then he began moving through it. School had changed. Not in the way stories usually describe change. Not dramatically, and not overnight. The hallways looked the same. The classes moved the same way. But the specific space Chulwu had occupied in the building's social structure was now a gap, and gaps of that kind get noticed. People watched Dowin differently. Not with respect. Not yet, exactly. With the uncertain attention given to something that has been categorized and now requires recategorizing. He felt the shift in small ways. A slightly wider path cleared in the corridor. A glance held a half-second longer before looking away. A comment dropped too quickly when he came within hearing range. Chulwu was still present in the building and had not lost his reputation overnight. But he had stopped sending messages. He had stopped appearing in Dowin's path. Whatever calculation he had run after the corridor produced a result that kept him, for now, at a careful distance. Jaman was a separate matter. The karaoke evening had made Dowin visible to a network that had not previously noted his existence, and not everyone in that network was simply absorbing the information and moving on. The system had begun flagging new contacts moving through the same areas he did, people with some connection to the events of that evening, people whose intentions the system seemed to consider worth tracking. A mission arrived on a Wednesday morning with a tone he had not encountered before. Not a combat instruction, not an attendance requirement, something closer to a quiet warning. It named a location, described a contact, and informed him that his route home was being monitored. He adjusted his route. The contact was there, exactly where and as described, and Dowin arrived home 2 streets earlier and without incident. The system rewarded him with a bronze key and a notification that felt, honestly, a little self-satisfied. He used the key on his speed rating and kept moving. Seon reappeared on a Friday. No message, no announcement. She was simply outside the school gate when he came through it, hands in her jacket pockets, looking like she had always planned to be precisely there. She told him she had an errand, and he was coming with her. He considered this. The outstanding agreement was still open. She had not named the wish yet, had not called on it. This did not feel like the wish. She stated the plan as though its details were administrative. He went. The errand turned out to be a sequence of things. A clothing store, where she spent a focused amount of time examining jackets, while he stood nearby and received a system notification, informing him he was technically in an active mission scenario. A food stall near the river where she insisted on something he had never ordered before, which turned out to be considerably better than it looked. An arcade, where she lost twice at a claw machine, and accepted this with complete composure. The system treated the entire afternoon as a mission sequence. Small objectives appeared and were replaced by new ones. Pay for something, say something, stay in the area. He completed them, one by one, without making it visible. The rewards were minor individually, but the afternoon as a whole produced a partial silver key that he had not earned before, sitting now in his inventory beside the gold one. What the system did not track, because it tracked outcomes rather than texture, was how the afternoon felt. He had not spent hours that were not organized around someone else's emergency or his own survival strategies in longer than he could clearly trace. The food at the river stall had genuinely been good. She laughed once at something he said. A real laugh, briefly and without ceremony, and he had not known what to do with that. When they parted at the train station, she looked at him steadily for a moment. She said she was beginning to think the arrangement with the outstanding wish was going to be interesting. She did not explain what she meant. She walked through the gate. He stood outside the station longer than necessary. The system window ran quietly. He thought about the partial silver key. He thought about the conversation at the river stall, the jacket she had eventually selected and carried over her arm the rest of the afternoon without mentioning again. He thought about the wish and what she might eventually name. The system offered no insight on this. It cataloged what it could measure and stayed quiet about everything it could not. He started walking home. The wish came on a Sunday, no preamble. Sullion sent a message that gave only an address, a time, and 2 words: bring nothing. He arrived at a building that looked like a disused meeting hall from the outside, with interior space that felt twice as large once he was inside it. Wooden floors, high windows with the light coming through at an angle, 24 people arranged in loose clusters around the walls. They all looked at him when he came through the door. Si-san was standing in the center of the room. She looked the same as she always did. composed, assessing, slightly ahead of whatever situation she was standing in. When everyone had seen him and she had confirmed it, she said something to the room that took him approximately 3 seconds to process. She said she wanted Dowin to lead Borame. The room absorbed this with a silence that had different qualities in different corners of it. Some of the people looked curious, some looked skeptical. One person, standing near the far wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set, looked like he had received specific and unwelcome news. Sion turned to Dowin and told him the wish was now named. He looked at the room. He looked at her. He understood that the outstanding agreement was not optional in its nature, and never had been, and that she had spent the intervening weeks deciding whether this specific use of it was something she could commit to. Apparently she could. He said he accepted. The rival's name was arrived at through a process of listening to 3 separate conversations in the room over the following 20 minutes. He went by a name Dowin cataloged simply as Kang. He was older by 2 years, built with the solid proportions of someone who had been in physical situations and emerged from them without losing confidence. He had been, by what Dowin could gather, the assumed next leader of Borame before Seon made her announcement. The assumption had been comfortable and unchallenged, and the announcement had removed both qualities simultaneously. Kang made his position known by requesting a clarification, delivered to Seon, rather than Dowin, in the tone of someone who considered the thing still negotiable. He said that he had questions about the candidate's suitability and that the group had a process for settling such questions. Sion listened to this. Then she confirmed that yes, there was a process. Dowin waited. The process, it emerged, involved fighting, which was, he reflected, consistent with how most things in this social structure resolved themselves. What he had not anticipated was who would be fighting. Sejong arrived 20 minutes later. He came through the side entrance with 2 people behind him, moving with the easy ownership of someone who had already been briefed on the situation and considered it a routine errand. He was not a member of Borame. He was an outside hire, or close enough to one. A former school delinquent 2 years graduated, known by several people in the room, brought in specifically because of his reputation for resolving exactly this kind of dispute. Dowin recognized him. Sejong did not immediately recognize Dowin. He scanned the room, landed on Dowin long enough to note him as the subject, and produced the expression of someone who has been brought a smaller task than they were expecting. Then something shifted in his face. He looked more carefully. The recognition arrived slowly, and when it did, his expression changed in a specific way. Not respect, the opposite of respect, the sudden, genuine amusement of someone who cannot believe their good fortune. He told the room he knew this kid. He told them to relax, that they would be done quickly. Dowin checked his system. No new mission. This was the existing one, the leadership question, expressed through the only framework this room operated in. He checked his keys, his stats as they stood, the skill list. He had Falcon Descent. He had Blind Spot Strike, which he had unlocked 2 days prior from a silver key and not yet tested in a real situation. He had Destructive Blows, still locked behind a gold key he had not used. His mana ceiling was sufficient for 2 full skill activations, possibly 3 if he was conservative. He also had Critical Hit. Critical Hit was listed at the bottom of his active skills with a 1% activation probability. 1%. He had read the entry 4 times when it first appeared, checking whether the number was a display error. It was not. The skill could trigger on any physical strike, could not be controlled or predicted, and delivered enough concentrated force to shift the outcome of a fight where nothing else could. 1 in 100. He had cleared entire game dungeons on worse odds. He knew what 1% felt like from the inside, the knowledge that you were likely to fail 99 times before you succeeded, and the discipline required to keep performing the action correctly enough for the 100th attempt to count. He had never had to apply that knowledge to his own body in a real fight before. He would need to now. Sejong was fast and he was precise, which was the more dangerous combination. Brute strength could be angled around if you had enough spatial awareness. Speed and precision together required a different answer because they closed the margin that awareness operated in. The first exchange told Dowin most of what he needed to know. Sejong tested him with a forward combination, not at full commitment, reading his responses. Dowin managed the distance and absorbed 1 impact on his forearm that left a deep ache he noted and set aside. His counterattack with a standard strike did nothing useful. Sajong stepped around it with the ease of someone who had already cataloged the pattern. The room watched. Dowin created distance and ran the calculation. Falcon descent required height. The room had a raised area along one wall, but the distance was wrong for what he needed. Blind spot strike required identifying a gap in the opponent's sensory field, and Sajong's sensory field was, based on 3 minutes of observation, considerably smaller than Dowin would have preferred. Critical hit required hitting Sajong at all, which the current exchange was suggesting was going to be its own challenge. Sajong had begun to enjoy himself. This was visible in small ways. A slight loosening in his posture, a pause between exchanges, where he communicated something to one of the people behind him without looking concerned about the interval. He told Dowin to stop stalling. He said the old Dowin at least moved around more. Dowin kept moving and kept swinging. This was not impressive to watch. He was aware of that. The hits were landing at a rate that produced no visible effect on Sajong, while producing considerable effects on him. A cut above his eye from an impact he had not fully avoided. A stiffness developing in his left side, where he had taken 2 consecutive strikes while finding a new angle. The system tracked his health in a bar he had learned to monitor peripherally. The bar had been declining for several minutes with only brief pauses. But each impact he landed, however insufficient, was an attempt. Each attempt carried the same fixed probability. The arithmetic was cold and simple. He needed to keep landing strikes until the number came up. Sajong stopped letting him. He switched to a more aggressive approach, and Dowin found himself operating in a defensive space that kept shrinking. He caught a strike across the shoulder that sent him sideways. He caught another on the arm he raised to protect his face, and felt something sing sharply from elbow to wrist. He reset his footing. He breathed through it. He heard someone near the door say something about calling it early. He heard Seon say one word in response. It was very quiet. No one said anything else. He went forward again. The room had tilted slightly in Dowin's perception. Not spinning, just the particular quality of fighting, past the point where everything is clean and sharp, where the edges of things soften, and the only information that remains fully reliable is the immediate geometry of the fight in front of you. He had read about this state in a game guide once, a description of how veteran fighters perceived high-stress situations. He had thought at the time it was editorial exaggeration. He filed that observation away for later. Sajong came forward with a combination that committed weight to the final impact. Dowin stepped into it rather than away from it, which was not the instinctive response, which was why Sajong had not prepared for it. The angle was wrong for a clean strike. He took the impact on the upper chest. He used the collision to close the distance. He hit Sajong 3 times in rapid succession from the close range. The first 2 did ordinary damage, logged, measured, insufficient. The third landed differently. Something activated. Not with a dramatic flash, not with a sound the room could hear. A notification appeared in bright characters across his vision. A warmth that was distinct from ordinary impact spread outward from his knuckles. And Sajong, who had been leaning forward with the confidence of a person controlling an exchange, stopped. His footing shifted. His hands came down slightly. The breath he took was the breath of someone reassessing whether they were hurt or not. He was hurt. Dowin hit him again before the reassessment was complete. Sajong went down onto one knee. He stayed there for 2 seconds that felt considerably longer to everyone watching. Then he looked up at Dowin with an expression that was not amusement anymore and was not contempt. He got up slowly, decided something, and stepped back. Kang, from across the room, said something short. Sajong told him the match was done. The silence lasted until Seon broke it by announcing the outcome to the room in a tone that allowed for no subsequent argument. Several people shifted their posture. A few moved from one cluster to another in the small social reorganization that follows a verdict of this kind. Dowin stood in the center of the room and breathed carefully. His side ached. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but had replaced itself with a swollen heat. His left arm worked, which was good. The system ran its post-fight summary at the edge of his vision. Experience. Key fragments. A note about critical hits activation having been logged as a significant combat event. He noticed the room was wrong, not socially, physically. There was a smell that had not been present before he landed on the floor twice, something acrid underneath the wood dust smell of the building, and he had been too occupied to register it fully until now. Smoke. It was coming from the back section of the building, thin, at first, the kind that makes you question whether you are actually smelling it. Then not thin, someone near the corridor shouted. Several people moved at once toward the main door. Dowin looked for Seon. She was not near the main door. She was on the far side of the room, where the wooden storage structure along the back wall had caught, and was producing a line of orange that was widening as he watched. Two people were between her and the exit, but both of them were already moving, pulling her toward the corridor. One of them reached her. The storage structure produced a sharp crack, and a section of it fell, sending a wave of embers outward. The two people at the corridor entrance stumbled through. He heard one of them shout from the other side. Seon was still in the room. She was on the floor near the far wall, one hand braced, looking at the corridor. The smoke was dense enough now that the high windows were invisible. The heat was directional and specific and increasing. Dowin crossed the room. He reached her before he had fully decided whether the calculation in favor of doing so was sound, which made it less a decision and more a response. He got one arm under hers, and she got her feet under her. They moved toward the corridor together, not cleanly, negotiating around the edge of the fire that had spread from the storage structure to the boards along the floor. He took a section of it on his left forearm, crossing the final distance, a bright pain that he processed and did not address. They came through the corridor opening. The door at the end was already open, and they went through it into the cold air outside, where the rest of the room's occupants had gathered at a distance from the building. Seon coughed. She got upright and looked at him. She said his arm. He looked at it. A burn across the forearm, visible and not small. The skin raised in a way that was not going to be comfortable for several days. He registered this as accurate information and noted he would deal with it shortly. She looked at his face for a long moment. Then she turned to the group and announced, in a voice that carried to the edge of the gathered people, that Dowin was the new leader of Borame. No one argued. The burn needed attention before anything else. Seon located a pharmacy 2 streets away and stood beside him while the pharmacist assessed it and applied dressing with a manner that suggested this was not the most interesting wound she had dealt with that day. Dowin paid for the supplies. His system quietly processed the evening's events in the background. On the walk back, Kang passed them. He was heading in the opposite direction with 3 people from the meeting. He looked at Dowin when their paths crossed and held the look for a moment. Then he moved on without speaking. Dowin watched him go and kept the observation for later. Seon noticed him watching. She told him Kang was not finished, that he should not read the silence as acceptance. She said the silence was something else, a kind of pressure applied quietly, and that he would need to understand the difference. He told her he understood the difference. He told her he had been on the wrong side of that kind of silence for most of his life. She was quiet for a step or two. She said she knew. She said it was part of why she had made the decision she made. He did not ask what the other parts were. He thought about the boy from the karaoke venue corner. He thought about Sajong getting to one knee on the wooden floor of a building that was on fire by the time it mattered. He thought about the system's cold probability notation for critical hit, 1%, which it had taken him the better part of an hour to make happen. He had been the worst odds in that room for most of the night. He had come out the other side of it. He thought about all the people who had watched the old Dowin and decided what he was. He thought about the calculation they were running now, the update they were performing whether they wanted to or not. The system window was quiet. His arm throbbed under the dressing in a steady, regular way. He had spent years being the person no one watched when something important happened. He understood, walking back through streets he had walked countless times as someone invisible, that this was finished. It was not comfort. Exactly. The gangs he had just placed himself at the front of were real organizations with real enemies, and the council structures above them contained people who had been doing this considerably longer and with considerably more resources than he had. The missions would not ease. The keys would require more dangerous circumstances to earn. The locked skills on his list were patient, in the way locked things are patient. They simply waited. But Dowin had never chosen his work based on whether it was safe. He had chosen it based on whether it was solvable. Borame was his now. He started solving. The days following the fire settled into something Dowin had not experienced before. Quiet that he had not paid for in advance. School was the clearest example. The hallways moved around him differently now. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, but in the small constant adjustments that reveal a changed social fact. A seat appearing free at a table where it had not been before. A corridor clearing a fraction earlier as he approached. conversations lowering in register as he passed, and resuming without the specific quality they had previously carried. No one told him his standing had shifted. Everyone behaved as though it already had. Chul Wu he did not see for 2 weeks. When he finally appeared, it was at the far end of the ground floor corridor, and he looked at Dowin with the expression of someone revising a document they had considered finished. Dowin did not approach him. He had enough to work with. The key system had opened 2 new entries since the meeting hall. A silver key from a mission, completed the morning after the fire, had unlocked a passive trait, endurance, which the system described as a reduction in physical exhaustion recovery time. He felt the effect within a day, a slight reduction in the low-grade ache that had been a constant companion since the fighting started. A second mission awarded a bronze key he applied to speed, and the world moved slightly slower in moments of high attention, which was the best way he had to describe the effect from inside it. Borame itself required less managing than he had anticipated. The organization ran on existing habits and existing people, and his role in the early days was less active leadership than the establishment of presence, attending the locations the group used, being visible to the members whose cooperation Sion had told him would need to be cultivated rather than assumed. He was attentive, he was consistent, he did not perform authority, which turned out to produce more of it than performing it would have. Sion appeared on alternating days, sometimes with information, sometimes for reasons she did not explain. He had stopped expecting her arrivals to make complete sense, and had started simply tracking what she left behind: a name to know, a location to remember, a piece of context that clarified something he had been holding without a frame. He was grateful for it. He did not tell her so directly, which she seemed to understand and not require. The anniversary arrived on a Wednesday. He knew the date well before it got there. Every year he had the same experience. The week before moved with a low-level awareness of what was coming, and then the day itself arrived, with an ordinary quality that made the weight of it feel strange by contrast. His father's coat was still on the hook by the door. He had never moved it. He had never decided anything about it. He sat at the kitchen table that morning with the folder open in front of him. He did not take it out intentionally. He had been looking for a different document and found it beneath an old utility envelope. And once it was in his hands, opening it felt like the automatic continuation of finding it. The death certificate was the same. The language was the same. Vehicle incident, date, the specific administrative terminology that replaced the reality of a thing with a form of words that could be filed and organized. He had read it so many times the words had stopped producing much response. But this time, reading it, something nagged at the edge of his attention. He could not name it. It was not in the document itself. It was in what the document did not say, a specific shape of absence that he could sense, without yet being able to outline. He held it for a moment, the folder open, the kitchen quiet. Then he closed the folder and placed it back where he found it. He would come back to this. He went to school. The system mission that arrived at noon was different from any previous one. Not in its structure, mission, location, deadline, penalty clause, but in its language. Previous missions had described the requirement in terms of actions. Go here, defeat this person, complete this task. This one described a situation. It said a contact was operating near a specific intersection, 4 blocks from school, who had recently moved into territory, Borame claimed without seeking any acknowledgement, and that failure to address the situation directly before 7 that evening would result in a significant stat penalty. He arrived at the intersection at 5:30. Sunwo was already there. He was recognizable from the description Seon had provided a week earlier, when she had mentioned his name the way you mention a piece of weather coming from a particular direction. Former competitive athlete, sprint category, record holder at regional level before something happened that ended his competitive career. He had redirected whatever drove him in that direction into the network of organized fighting around the gang structures, where being the fastest person in any exchange was an advantage that had never yet required adjustment. He was not large. This was the first thing Dowin noted. He did not have Jamon's physical scale or Sajang's solid build. He was lean and stood with the posture of someone whose body had been specifically trained to move quickly, a compressed readiness in his frame that looked casual until you were close enough to see how little any of it was actually at rest. He looked at Dowin and said something brief. He had heard the new Borame leadership was a kid who got lucky once and asked whether the kid had any business at this intersection. Dowin told him he was there regarding the territorial situation. Sunwo nodded as though this was the correct response, adjusted his stance slightly, and came forward at a speed that Dowin had not adequately prepared for. The first exchange lasted approximately 4 seconds and taught Dowin several things he needed immediately. Sunwo's speed was not fast in the way some fighters were fast, bursts of acceleration between points of stillness. It was continuous. From the moment he moved, every part of the movement was committed and coordinated. No wasted segments, no recovery intervals that could be read as hesitation. Dowin managed to avoid the first 2 strikes, but the third caught him across the cheekbone, and the fourth he barely recognized until he was already taking it. He created distance. He stood on the other side of the gap he had made and ran the first pass through his analysis. His stats as they stood were not sufficient to match the pace directly. This was a fact and not a personal judgment, and he treated it accordingly. Matching the pace was not the objective. The objective was identifying an approach that worked within the pace available to him. He watched Sunwo cover the distance between them again. His blind spot strike, unlocked from a silver key and not yet tested under real conditions, operated on a simple principle. Every person has positions within their immediate spatial field where sensory processing is slower, gaps in the attentional geometry built by habit and physical orientation. Standard fighting training addresses most of these, but most fighting training is designed for the range of normal opponents, and the adjustments it makes for speed tend to narrow the frontal field, while creating compensatory blind areas at specific oblique angles. A fighter who moved as fast as Sunwo would, by reflex, have his attentional system operating at maximum frontal commitment, which meant the oblique gaps were larger than usual, not smaller. Dowin reset his footing and waited for Sunwo to close the distance. Sunwo's speed at 17 had announced itself through a regional sprint competition that nobody in his age bracket was close to winning. His father had been in the stands, had watched the heat from the 3rd row, and had told him afterward that the margin was insufficient and that he needed to work harder before the championship. The championship had been 3 months later. Sunwo had arrived in the fastest condition of his life to that point. He had also arrived knowing, in the quiet, specific way that knowledge sometimes arrives before evidence confirms it, that the boy from the next city was going to be faster. He had been right. He had lost by a margin smaller than most people in the stands could perceive. His father met him at the exit and said 3 sentences that Sunwo had not repeated to anyone in the years since. He did not need to repeat them. They had remained in a location inside him that did not require access through language. He had stopped running competitively 6 weeks later. What he had not stopped was the requirement. The requirement that whatever he committed to, he had to be first. Not best in every dimension, not most accomplished in the broadest sense, first. The one thing his father's 3 sentences had taken from him was his tolerance for the experience of being surpassed, and the response to that removal had been to ensure the experience did not occur again. No one in the network he had moved through since leaving competitive sport had been faster than him. This was still true. Dowin was not trying to be faster than him. The second exchange was longer, and Sunwo recognized something different about it approximately halfway through. Dowin was not attempting to match his speed. He was doing something else, something that registered as avoidance at first glance, but was not avoidance. He was positioning. Taking angles that served no immediate offensive purpose but altered the geometry of the space between them in small increments, drawing Sunwo's forward commitment in specific directions while creating specific relationships between Sunwo's position and the points of the environment behind Dowin. Sunwo closed the geometry every time. He was too fast for Dowin to hold an angle for more than a second, but each time he closed it, he arrived at the same 3 or 4 angles of approach, the ones his speed gave him most cleanly. Pattern. Dowin took 2 more impacts while locating the repeat. Both of them opened new information, the specific interval between Sunwo's committed forward movement and his reset, the millisecond window in which maximum speed meant maximum directional investment. He identified the gap. On Sunwo's next approach, Dowin did not move the way he had moved the previous 6 times. He dropped slightly and rotated, and the leg that came forward used blind spot strike not as a hand technique, but as a leg technique, directed at the oblique low-angle position that Sunwo's committed speed had, exactly as predicted, left open. The contact landed at the knee, not damaging by itself, but at the speed Sunwo was moving, contact at the base of his lead leg sent a fault through the geometry of the movement, and Sunwo went offline. He recovered fast. He always recovered fast. But he looked at Dowin differently now. He came forward again, and this time, there was a new quality in his approach. A tightening, a compensation for the angle that had just cost him. This was the adjustment a trained athlete made when encountering something unexpected. It was also, Dowin noted, the adjustment that told him the oblique position had genuinely landed somewhere. He waited for the adjustment to become habitual. It took 3 more exchanges. When it had settled into Sunwo's positioning as a fixed assumption, Dowin went the other way. The second blind spot was at the opposite oblique, created by the very compensation Sunwo had made for the first one. Dowin had been cultivating the angle for 4 exchanges, staying away from it, letting it build into an unchallenged assumption. He entered it on the 5th. Sunwo's speed meant that when his compensation was wrong, the error was fast and therefore large. His body committed fully to the direction his trained system had told it was safe. Dowin's strike arrived at the high point of that commitment, from the angle that had just been classified as closed. It connected at the temple. Sunwo's movement stopped for the first time since the exchange began. Not stopped, interrupted. A genuine interruption. The physical kind where the body's coordination has received a signal it cannot immediately override. He stood for one clear moment, weight unbalanced. The elegant machinery of his speed paused from the outside. Dowin hit him twice more while the window existed. Sunwo went down onto one knee on the pavement, one hand braced. He stayed there long enough that the outcome was communicated clearly to anyone who might have been watching. He got up. He looked at Dowin. The expression was not the one people usually wore after a physical defeat. Not anger, not humiliation. Something more complex. The specific expression of someone whose primary organizing principle has been tested and wants to understand, on a technical level, how. He asked how Dowin had found it. The angle. Dowin told him he had watched how his speed worked and looked for what it required him to commit to. A pause. Sunwo rotated his neck, feeling where the impact had landed. He told Dowin that no one had found the angle before. Dowin said that most people tried to match the speed instead of working around it. Another pause. Something moved across Sunwo's expression that Dowin could not fully read. Then Sunwo turned and walked away, not quickly, not with the brisk indifference of someone unconcerned, with the particular deliberateness of someone processing something that needs processing before the next thing. The system ran its post-fight calculation, while Dowin stood at the intersection in the early evening light, his cheek aching, his left knee tender, where he had absorbed a misdirected blow in the third exchange. 2 keys had been awarded, a silver and a gold, the largest single post-fight reward he had received. He looked at the gold key in the inventory. He used it. The locked entry it selected was destructive blows, a technique drawn from a game he had completed twice, a power-concentrated strike that traded the clean momentum of a standard impact for something closer to the force of a hammer driving a stake, all energy directed into the narrowest possible point of contact. It was the kind of skill that required the right moment to be worth using. It would not be fast. It would be, when it landed, conclusive. He closed the inventory and started walking. The evening was cooling. He turned toward home, the gold key notification settling into his records, and thought about Sunwo on the pavement, with one hand braced, and something working through his expression that had nothing to do with the fight. He thought about the father who had said 3 sentences at an exit gate, and what that kind of sentence did to a person over years. He thought about his own father's coat on the hook by the door. He thought about the folder, the document, the shape of the absence he had felt, but could not name that morning. 3 days later, a message reached him through Sayon. She came to the location where Borame held its regular gathering, and she waited until the room was fewer people. Then she told him, in a tone she did not usually use, that something had come to her attention. She said someone had been making inquiries. Not about Borame, not about Dowin's current standing, about his father. He was still for a moment. She said the inquiries were being made by a person connected to a structure she had recently learned was present inside the council network. She could not tell him more than that yet, she said, because she did not yet have more than that. But she wanted him to know the direction the question was moving. He said his father died 4 years ago. He said the official document said it was an accident. She looked at him with a steadiness that told him she knew the word official was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. She said she knew. She said she thought perhaps he should begin looking at whether official and accurate were the same thing. He went home that evening and opened the folder again. He read the document again. He sat with the specific absence he had felt before, the shape of what was not in the language. And for the first time since finding it as a 12-year-old, he began approaching it not as a document to be read, but as a document that had been written by someone who wanted certain things in it and certain things out. The system was quiet. His father's coat hung on its hook in the other room. He turned the page.